Welcome to another episode of the Speaking of Writers podcast. I'm Steve Richards. Today we're joined by one of the most influential figures in the history of radio broadcasting, Dan Mason. He spent more than 4 decades helping shape the industry, leading some of the most successful media organizations in America while navigating seismic changes in technology, audience behavior, and the business of entertainment. He has a new memoir out, Fearless: The Life and Times of a Media Maverick. It's a fascinating and deeply personal look at the evolution of radio through the eyes of a visionary executive, filled with stories, lessons, triumphs, and challenges. The book explores leadership, innovation, risk-taking, and the enduring power of storytelling. Called, quote, one of the greatest visionaries in the history of radio, according to Scott Herman, Dan Mason offers readers an insider's look at one of America's most influential media industries. I'm happy to have Dan join me here on the Speaking of Writers podcast. Welcome.
Thank you, Steve.
What inspired you to write this book?
I get asked that question a lot. What inspired me was that I wanted a written account of my life. I think back at my parents, or maybe my grandparents, but if they would have written something that I could have seen, a lot of blanks may have been filled in about my own life that I would have understood more. I mean, my dad worked at International Harvester in Louisville, and for decades. And I would have loved to have heard stories about how things were back then inside the factory. I mean, it wouldn't mean anything to a lot of other people, but it would mean a lot to me. But I never had that. So I did want to write the written account of my life for anybody who cares and wants to read it.
The title itself is very powerful. Fearless, of course. What does that mean to you personally and professionally?
I think that means both. I mean, fearless would be not being afraid to deal with the changes that come along in your career and life. I mean, you got to keep showing up. And if one person's employment ends, they have to keep moving. You can't go backwards. You got to keep moving. It takes guts to do that because you tend to get told no a lot. But you have to play all the music out inside of you. And you can't be afraid of what people think. What would they say? What if I fail? You know, the whole litany of cliches that go along with it.
Was there a particular moment in your career when you realized you were witnessing a transformative era in broadcasting?
Yeah, of course. I think that would have been around the time when CBS sold CBS Radio to Entercom. And I could tell that even though that we were very profitable, we were doing like 30 cents on the dollar in profit. And how many businesses do that? But we were very profitable, but it was becoming a slow growth industry. There's no question about it. And I believe my 2 cents or my opinion was the analysts really put pressure on CBS to get into a hot, fast growth industry, i.e. digital. And I think that's the reason why they sold the company. And that was certainly a transformation, not only for CBS Radio, but look at a lot of mergers that came along beside that. That was a lot of transformation.
Take us back to the beginning. What first drew you to radio? From Kentucky originally, right?
Louisville. I've known since I was 12 years old what I wanted to do. And I used to just beat up radio stations like crazy. I was like what they call a contest pig. I want everything. I want trips to see the Beatles. I want a trip to Coney Island. I want craft pizza boxes. I want records. I want macaroni and cheese. I want everything. And then one day, the program director at then WKLO, Terrell Matheny, Kevin's father, got on the air and said that my street could win anymore. Now, can you imagine that being on the air? I thought, what's wrong with these guys? Of course, I'm just going to move one street over and start all over again. But I take credit for the 30-day prize rule in radio where you can't win in 30 days. I take full credit for it. But it was a progression, and I just love the business. Still love the business.
You were the guy on the contest lines.
I was.
Yeah.
And
Same here.
You know what my theory was? I had the system all down. Back in those days, we had dial phones. And I would get to the last number, take a pencil and put it underneath the dial. And then I would visualize, because I'd gone down to watch the disc jockeys in the showcase window, which WKLO had. And I could watch and see that he would announce a contest, and then he would move to his left a little bit, and maybe take a puff of cigarette or a drink of water, and then he would put the phone back on the hook. They left the phone off the hook in those days. You can't do that now. But I would say, I'd count that down. And then at home, when I was doing the contesting, I would pull the pencil out of the dial when I thought he would be doing that. And I got in a lot. Either I got in a lot or nobody was playing. So one of the two.
Do you remember the first time radio truly captivated your imagination?
Yes. I mean, I was fascinated with jingles, contests, my favorite disc jockeys, and I would listen constantly. I even wrote Johnny Randolph, who was at WAKY, letters saying, listen, I would move the night guy to mornings. I would take the morning show and move it overnight. I mean, I would critique the entire station. And one day he invited me down to the drugstore closest to Walnut Street, and we had lunch and we talked. And I think those years were formulative to me. That, believe it or not, I mean, it's hard to believe that some goofy kid could pick all that stuff up, but I kind of leaned that direction in my entire programming career, to try to create something and use theater of the mind and to try to be creative and do something that no one else was doing. But I can't. There's a lot of things, Steve, I'm not good at, but I'm very good at one thing, and that's getting people to listen to the radio. Mm-hmm. I can do that.
Looking back, what lessons from those early years stayed with you throughout your career?
I believe that there's sections in my book called Danisms, for lack of a better term. I believe that you can't believe your own hype because it will destroy you. I've seen so many people, they get on a roll and they think they're just bulletproof, and they believe their own hype, and people tell them how great they are, and rather than saying thank you and moving on, they actually believe it. And that's one thing. Another thing I've come to realize, there's a beginning, there's an end, and there's a final chapter to everything. So we have to realize that going into any job or any situation that we're in, but you don't go up every time. It just doesn't happen. You don't win the Super Bowl for 20 years consecutively. There's a lot of little lessons like that. I think another thing is to challenge yourself to always be the best version of yourself, and that's hard. That is really hard. But there's 5 or 6 other Danisms, so to speak, in there that I think people could take away from things that I've been through personally.
Yeah, the Danisms are great.
One other thing I'm going to add, all the things that I've spit out in this book, I've learned from other people, Steve. It's not like I invented them. And I rent them, but I got to give them back. So they're not mine to keep. That's why I try to help younger people, try to talk about this in the book. I did say that in the book, that the knowledge that I've gained is not mine. It came from others.
Yeah. You've had a front row seat to decades of change. What were some of the biggest technological shifts that reshaped broadcasting?
When HD radio came, it got so much pushback from the industry.
Yeah.
So much. I mean, it wasn't adopted. I remember doing an HD seminar in Los Angeles one time. This was early on when I was consulting Ubiquity, and who owned the HD technology at the time. And one person showed up. It was an engineer from K-Rock that wanted just to say hi. Nobody showed up for looking at this technology. So, and back in the day, this was a venture with 3 companies, CBS, Westinghouse, and Gannett. Those were the 3 people that put the money in for HD radio. Of course, it's grown now. I thought for a long time that it would be really cool to have five channels coming out of one, or five audio sources coming out of one. But, look at cable television. I should have known then that cable TV has 300 channels, and how many people watch 10 of them?
Yeah.
So, same theory in radio. Just concentrate on being great. You can't be great at everything.
Yeah, there was no buy-in. I was in Philadelphia when we were testing it. I was at Greater Media at the time. I know Philadelphia and Houston, I think, were the test markets. And then I went to Greater Media in Detroit, and we met with Ubiquity, and it just, there was no real, you never got the sense there was real buy-in to it.
It was like Ghost,
Yeah.
nothing.
Yeah. What do you believe radio has done particularly well during these periods of disruption?
Well, let me say that I won't speak for the entire industry. I'll speak for a group of people, whoever they may be, that they have driven companionship all the way home. Radio is about companionship. It's been that way. They've done research studies on this for decades. Same thing comes back every time. Radio is your friend. The radio is, you're part of their family. And by listening to all the people on the radio, you are drawn in. You are sad when they're sad. You're happy when they're happy. And so those are the people that I really commend. That it doesn't make any difference what market it's in. It can be small, medium, large. So I think that's what I remember most and like the most.
Yeah, I got to see that firsthand recently in 2024 here in Asheville during Hurricane Helene. My stations, we were the only thing they had. And it was just heart-wrenching, the stories we heard throughout our, post-storm coverage. But we were the lifeline for them and that companion.
Right. Always have been.
Yeah, and always has been, yeah. Throughout your career, you've been known as an innovator. What separates successful leaders from those who just simply manage?
I think one word, humility.
Hmm.
The successful leaders have to have some sort of humility, because you have to be willing to give everybody else the credit and take the blame for yourself. That's the way it has to work. And anybody who can't subscribe to that, they may have success for a while, but it's short term, in my opinion.
Dan, how important is risk taking in media leadership?
Well, I do say that in the book that you don't take risk unless you can envision a reward. You just don't take risk to take risk and say the attitude, well, let's see what happened. It wouldn't hurt. You're just shooting your bullets for no reason. So you would envision first what the reward is. What do you want to accomplish? And then you work backwards from there and figure out what is the best risk to do that. You want to be number one in the market? Then, okay, how do you do that? What's the best risk? Might be trying to hire the morning show across the street for double the amount,
Let's talk about culture. You hear that a lot, not only in radio and media, you hear in corporate America too. How do you build a culture that encourages creativity and innovation?
I think you have to celebrate the small wins. I'm a big Tom Peters fan, Passion for Excellence, that book. And I've read that book 10 times from cover to cover. And I believe that the innovation comes from several different things that build momentum along the way. One thing feeds on another, but you can't get there unless you start celebrating the small wins before you can go for the big. For example, if let's say you want to be number one in the market, but yet you go from a 2-3 to a 3-1. You can't just say, it's not good enough. We got to be number one. No, you celebrate that because it feeds on to the next thing. So I used to look for small wins like that to try to build people up and get them excited about the radio stations that I've worked with.
I'm a radio programmer, so I'm going to have you do a tease here. I coach teases all the time. Your book includes stories about iconic figures in broadcasting. Without giving away too much, is there a favorite story readers should look forward to?
There's a sort of dirty one about with Howard Stern that I don't want to talk about. You got to buy the book for that one. A sad one about Don Imus, very sad.
Mm.
Um, Idiotic ones like we had a morning guy at WUSN in Chicago, Gary D, which the Chicago Tribune like ripped constantly, probably for the right reasons. That's kind of funny, but kind of weird. But I did include it. There's other ones in there. There's funny stories about my bosses, i.e., Les Moonves and Mel. And there's a little bit of everything in there. And even some personal dark failures that I've had in my life. But which is a really tough thing because you can't, here again, my 2 cents, you can't write a book and talk about all the triumphs you've had. You gotta be human because we all have a dark side of somewhat dark side. But we don't expose it. We keep pushing ahead, which is what we're supposed to do. And there's probably some ratings failures that I've had too. I can give you one that jumps right out at me is when I went to Westinghouse Group W in 1993. I remember being at WNEW in the hallway. Scott Muni was there, and it was a big radio station. But K Rock was across the street, and Howard was beginning to really make inroads. And a sales lady came up to me and says, "I'm so glad you're here because you're going to save this radio station." And it was so frustrating. No matter what we tried, we were a 2-4. Of course, we had been a 4-1 or 4-0, but now we're down to a 2-4. And I remember Kevin Smith, who was the general manager. He's passed on since, but Kevin sent me, we were talking one day in Kevin's office. He goes, "Dan, you know what? You might just have to accept that we're going to be the best 2.4 station in America." And I looked at him, I thought, no, I'm not going to accept that. No, we had a 4-1 a year ago. But, in retrospect, Kevin was right because look what happened with NEW and all the changes they made and, it went talk and they did this and they did that. But I think if we would have stayed the course and been the best 2.4 radio station that could ever be, that would have turned around and those ratings would have gone back up.
If you were given the keys to a startup radio station today in 2026, what goes into creating a successful radio brand that listeners can connect with?
First thing I would do is I personally would do the morning show. I would be the morning person. Now, I'm assuming that, let's rephrase that. Let's say, Dan, you go out and buy a medium small market radio station. How are you going to make it successful? What are you going to do? So I say, okay, first thing I'm going to do the morning show. I'm not going to use joke services. I'm going to be talking about the community. I'm going to go to every function where people are and introduce myself to as many people as I can. I'll hand out my card and ask them to please listen to me. Now, I think I could probably cover a good cross-section of the population in a small market. An example, what I had Danny Bonaducci, when Danny came to WYSP then in Philly, Danny's in my office. He goes, "What can I do to be different?" And I said, "You know what?" And this was about the time the Million Man March was taking place. And I said, "You know what, Danny? Let's do the 1,000,000-person handshake." And he goes, "What's that?" He goes, "You shake hands with 1,000,000 people or shake 1,000,000 hands." He said, "Great, I'm going to do it." Danny went out and got his business cards, just like I'm talking to you about. Yeah. And he started going around shaking hands all over the market. Now, Danny says he did 1,000,000. Now, I don't know that that's true. Management accounts say it was a lot less. But the spirit was there that he wanted to touch as many people as he possibly could. That would be very important. And the second thing I would do is I would always look for a bandwagon coming down the road. And what I mean about a bandwagon is a cause, a celebration, little league team makes it to the finals, you name it. So I would look for bandwagons. Then the other thing I would do is look for weather type events. For example, what happened to, remember the days when radio stations used to fry eggs on the sidewalk when it was 105?
Yes. Yep.
Where do you ever hear? You don't hear that anymore.
No,
I don't. but it always made television. It always got attention. And those are the type of things that you want people to talk. And I would try to make people talk. Now, some things you can't do anymore. Like, for example, when Randy Newman had Short People and that song came out,
Mm-hmm.
I did a Short People's Party, which is descriptive in the book, where you couldn't get in unless you were under 4'5". So, and we had little 6-ounce Millers to drink. We had pigs in a blanket. We had short ribs, and the whole thing was set up on the song. But it made people smile. Now, I don't think we could do that now. There'd be too many people that would be offended, probably. But you get the spirit of it.
Topical, in the moment, like the
Yeah,
frying the eggs on the sidewalk. Yeah.
that's it.
Dan, do you think younger generations will discover radio in the same way previous generations did?
Most likely not. I mean, let's face it, when in our generation, radio was used as a means of music discovery. And there was not Spotify, there was not Pandora, there was not Apple CarPlay. They were on, the list goes on. But I think that there is an opportunity to do something that they can't, which is be a friend. I saw a friend of mine made a really smart comment. He goes, radio is about making friends, and Spotify can't do that. We make friends. Disc jockeys make friends. Morning teams make friends. Radio stations make friends.
Back to the companionship.
Exactly. It all trails back to that. It just maybe says it in different ways, maybe, but it is what it is.
What advice would you give to someone entering radio or media today?
You got to keep showing up no matter what. And you can't worry about the rejection. You keep, like I say in the book, it's like my acting career, which is hilarious. But one day I thought, you know what? I'm not too busy right now. I'm going to try out and I'm going to go into acting. And I went and got photos done, and I got a manager, and I got 2 parts in House of Cards as an extra. And I made $10 an hour, but I had such a good time. I mean, after that, I had a fake wife in each scene, which was hilarious in itself. But I kept showing up for $10 an hour, and I still get these little offers for like $125 a day, and you got to fly to LA, which I'm just too old to do that now. But at the time, House of Cards was big back then, and it was really a unique experience, which I do describe in the book.
It's great too. Dan, if you could speak to your younger self, that young Dan Mason dialing that request line in Kentucky at the start of your career too, what would you tell him?
Don't be afraid. Fearless. You have to be fearless. Don't be afraid, because there's always going to be somebody telling you that you're no good. They're going to be somebody that every announcer goes through this, that you're not good enough to work in this market or that market. My wife was somewhat critical of my book because she didn't think I included enough dirt or whatever. And I said, you know what? Go write your own book. This is my book. And I think that attitude you have to carry. You're going to get kicked in the face, and you just like the acting career. But you just kind of keep moving.
I want to mention the charity.
I don't think CBS Sports was too thrilled when I went to do women's play-by-play basketball, but I got knocked around. But I'm still doing play-by-play women's basketball right now at Shenandoah University in Winchester. But there's always somebody that'll tell you no.
I want to mention the charity too that you're very involved with, broadcasters. That some of the proceeds of this book are going to. If you could talk about that a little bit.
The Broadcasters Foundation of America has been around for almost 80 years. And way back when it was established, everybody was in fairly good health because people were young. The business was really young still. The benefits were there. Companies had health, they had plans, they had dental, they had vision, they had good benefits back then. And as time went on, decades later, those young people got old. And now it's a different ballgame. And the Broadcasters Foundation will not will always be there for people who qualify, who are in acute need. Could be cancer, it could be a tornado, it could be you name it. I used to think about 15 years ago that we had cancer on the run, but no, it's got back with vengeance. And it'll take you down overnight. And then you find yourself out of work. You can't work. Where are you going to go?
Yeah.
The foundation is the only charity in America that takes care of radio and television people in need.
Yeah, it's a great organization. I can attest to it. It helped out some of our team after Hurricane Helene here in Nashville, after they lost everything. Cars and apartments were flooded out. So great organization.
I always tell people when I do speeches about it that if you don't know of somebody who's been helped by the Broadcasters Foundation, you will.
Yeah.
Someday you will.
Yep. How would you like your contribution to broadcasting to be remembered, Dan?
That I never cut the line. I always stood in line, waited for my turn. I didn't step over anybody that I'm aware of. That I always gave people the benefit of the doubt. I got burned a couple of times, but it didn't matter. I mean, the good way outweighs the bad on something like that. And just try to be the best version of myself wherever I went.
The book is Fearless, The Life and Times of a Media Maverick. It is insightful, entertaining, and inspiring look at the evolution of radio and the leadership required to thrive through decades of change. And again, as an added bonus, profits from book sales benefit the great Broadcasters Foundation of America, supporting a worthy cause while celebrating the rich history of broadcasting. Dan Mason, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for joining me.
One more thing, Steve.
Sure.
You can buy the book you have to go to www.danmasonbook.com. This is going to be the only book I'll ever write. So it's danmasonbook.com. You go to that link, and it'll take you right to Lulu Publishing. You can see it. You can buy it there.
Thank you. And don't forget to subscribe to the Speaking of Writers podcast, Spotify, YouTube, Apple, and wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Steve Richards. Thank you, Dan.
You're welcome.
And thanks for watching. I'll talk to you again next time.